But these new guys doing the comment protests, smearing things all over artwork, and their new slogan is art more important than life, or is it more important than the future, or whatever it is? It makes no sense. And like, I disagree with them on like a couple of terms. Like, the first thing is like, their whole thing is funded by an oil tycoon's daughter. Like, what? Your whole movement is funded trying to get rid of oil, but it's funded by an oil magnate, basically. Second of all, your whole thing is not very thought out, because moving directly from oil to electric is not feasible in our current state. Like, we don't have enough technology to do that at the moment, and trying to do that would actually cause more harm than good. To move everything over to electric suddenly would actually impact you, just like California is having right now, where everything will skyrocket in price. Energy will become unaffordable to a common person, which means everything that you're trying to also go for as a secondary point, like making sure people who are hungry get food and heating and stuff like that, that would also be completely useless. That would disappear altogether, because all that stuff will go through so expensive that only the 1% or 3 to 4, maybe the top 5% of people on the planet would be able to afford to even go anywhere if you all of a sudden just moved everything to electric and had no power from gasoline or coal whatsoever. This does not seem like it's geared towards common people getting a better life and making the environment better for the future, but it's geared to more of making things better, yeah, but only for the elite, because at the end of the day, that is the only people that's going to benefit from this. If everything moves the way they want it to, those are the only people that will benefit. They're providing no actual solutions that would be beneficial. They're not even calling for research to better solve these problems. They're calling for a complete stop of using of coal and gasoline and just move to electric. That is not a plan that's good for the common person. That is only a plan that's good for the elites that can afford to do all this, that can afford the massive prices that would happen when this happens. So these protests have basically gotten out of hand, and it's kind of dumb to say the least. They're vandalizing or kind of just throwing sauce on top of a glass frame, basically. Because in all actuality, nothing's being damaged. And even if the paintings were being damaged in these protests, does it really matter? Like, these paintings have been photographed and copied thousands of times to the point where they can be replicated in like 20 minutes and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. 99.9% of people would not know the difference between the replicated version of these photos and these paintings than the actual things. But it doesn't matter, because that's not the real point I want to get at today. The real point I really want to get at is the fact that everyone's kind of missing the point. Like, these protests are trying to achieve something that's not achievable. They're talking about moving everything from gasoline to electric and getting rid of petroleum and things like that altogether. And my first problem with that is, first of all, your protest itself relies completely on the fact that you still have gasoline and petroleum products, because you're using super glue, which is kind of based on petroleum, and it requires gasoline to produce or petroleum to produce. And you get there by a car, and everybody's using a phone, which all requires power. So first of all, if you want to say you want to get this stuff done and get rid of all these things, you might want to start by doing an example. But my main point is not that, because it's kind of hard to just do that. But the thing is, moving away from coal, moving away from gasoline, moving away from all this other stuff suddenly is not feasible, because once you do that, you're going to raise the price of energy itself to an astronomical amount. Just like in California, that's happening right now as we speak, because their mandate is to push out gasoline-powered cars and diesel-powered cars and replace it with all electric, and they're reducing their coal power plants and their gasoline-fired power plants at the same time, which is now putting a strain on their entire power grid system, which is to the point where they can't actually charge their cars during the day. They have to wait to charge their cars. They can only charge their cars certain days. They can't even run their ACs in the middle of a desert when they want to without actually putting a hindrance to the grid. They have rolling blackouts currently going on, and it's a lot worse. And this is all because they're trying to go away from gasoline in a sudden path without an actual solution in place already. And that is the main problem with these protests. They don't have a solution in place, and they're not trying to find a solution. Instead, they're trying to say we just need to do it and then figure it out later. But doing that would have such a huge impact that maybe 5% of the population, the top 5%, would be able to afford anything once this happens. Because not only would the price of everything just skyrocket, it would be skyrocketing overnight basically. So the price of gas is going to go through the roof. Well, they're not going to have gas, so the price it takes to charge your electric car is going to go through the roof. The cars are going to go through the roof because not everybody needs an electric car and there aren't enough being manufactured. So cars are going to go up. The price of electricity is going to go up. You can't use gasoline to heat, so now you have to use electricity, which is already higher, which is going to put even more strain on the system, which makes the price of electricity go up even more. And then you're going to cause rolling blackouts. So not only are you not going to have power all the time, so you can't even cook your food, you can't even store your food properly, but now like the normal stuff you take for granted every day, like charging your cell phone or using your computer, is no longer going to be a feasible option whenever you want it to be. You're going to be scheduled to when you're able to use those things. You're going to be even scheduled to be able to use your car. Even if you get it, even though your car is electric, you're going to have a schedule to charge your car so you can actually go to work. You're going to have to get a bicycle to go to work and a way to get to work that doesn't require energy that's not from you, in a sense. Anyway, enough of the bleakness and the telling you why it's such a bad idea. I'm going to actually provide a couple, well, not really a couple, but like one main solution that would actually help ease over the transition from electrical or from gasoline powered things to electrical, and would actually help implement, if we implement it now, would actually reduce the strain on the electrical grid and other things like that at the same time. And that is, we can use batteries, and not the lithium ion batteries that we have in Tesla cars or the lithium batteries that we have in the Tesla wall. Those are actually not great for this, because those batteries are one-time use basically. Once they start losing the efficiency, they can't be recycled, they have to be replaced completely. Instead, we can use the older version of the batteries that we used to use for purposes like this, deep cell batteries that use lead instead. Lead and acid alkaline deep cell batteries actually last a very long time, and when they start going bad, they can actually be cut open and the core often removed and rebuilt. They can be melted down and poured into new cast and new acid added to these batteries to restore them back to what they were when they were brand new, thus reducing the amount of pollution that's actually created or the amount of waste that's generated when we replace those. Now, not only do we have a better replacement of these batteries, making it easier to do, we would be able to get a lot more of these batteries, because these batteries have been in circulation for a very long time. So being able to produce a large amount of these batteries would be a lot easier than producing a large amount of lithium ion batteries that, yeah, granted they have more power, but they're more wasteful and they produce more pollutants than the regular batteries that we can use instead. And also, these batteries can be scaled up slightly, so we can make 48 volt batteries or 24 volt batteries, and we can make large ones to place in homes actually, which is the plan that I propose. With these batteries, they're lead-based batteries, but they carry generally 12 to 24 volts. You can make one bigger to carry 48 volts, or you can put them in sequence so that they can be 48 volts when you have two of them next to each other instead of just 24. These batteries are deep cell batteries, so they hold power for a very long time. Granted, they don't hold as much power as, say, the Tesla walls, the lithium ion ones, but they do actually last a lot longer in a sense of charge and recharge cycles. But that's besides the point. These batteries are actually a whole lot cheaper, and they can be implemented a lot easier with these batteries than with the Tesla wall batteries. So what the plan calls for is these batteries will be sent out to homes basically. All the new manufactured homes will have one or two of these batteries installed in them to begin with, and these batteries will be the ones that provide the power to the house. Much like in a solar setup, the power for the house comes from the battery, and the solar panels power the batteries to keep them charged. The solar panels do not put out enough power at one time to actually run the house, but these batteries can put out enough power at any given time to run anything that's required in the house with a transformer basically. So these batteries would actually be what's actually powering the house at any given moment. From here, instead of hooking them to solar panels, which they can be done also, they can be hooked directly into the grid. So the grid from the electrical system would actually charge these batteries. Now this will be a two-way hookup, much like solar panels are done, which once your battery is charged, it puts power back into the grid. So when you're not home or if you go on vacation for a while, your solar panels aren't just continually charging your battery. Your solar panels charge your battery fully, and then it dumps the rest of the excess power into the grid, which adds to the grid's ability to produce power. Basically, it gives more power to your neighbor and makes it easier for the grid to function. By doing this instead with just these batteries from all these houses all at once, you effectively reduce the strain on the grid's power plants to produce enough power to push the power not only from the power plant to the outskirts of the cities, which grids have to do. They have to generate more power than is needed in order for that power to flow to the end of the city. But also, it would mean that you wouldn't have blackouts as easy. Whenever the grid has to go offline for maintenance, the grids can go down for maintenance a lot easier because you wouldn't have to power up a power plant a whole day in advance, which is what has to be done in order for the switch to go seamlessly without causing rolling blackouts. You wouldn't have to power up a power plant 2 days in advance or a day in advance even. You could power up the power plant and get it up and running and then start switching over, because you wouldn't really have to concern yourself with if a couple houses lose power, or even if an entire city loses power, because the entire city has its own backup power supply at the individual houses. And even the ones that don't have a backup supply, because most houses will have a backup supply, it will pump power back into the grid when there's no power coming towards that house, especially for houses that aren't doing anything. So vacant houses or people that just aren't home at the moment, if your AC is off, things like that would actually help the entire grid function completely as one solid grid. And this would also reduce any kind of surges that would be required by the grid, because the surge would happen in the home and the surge would come from the battery itself. So the grid will provide a constant supply of power to that battery. It wouldn't go up and it wouldn't go down, which means on days where you use a ton of power, you would still basically be using the same amount of power from the grid. It's just your battery will get drained almost completely and then refilled the next day completely. So you wouldn't have a spike in your light bill over days, one day to the next day. Your light bill will be consistent throughout the entire year round basically. And then if solar panels are added to this, you can actually help increase the grid's capacity, because instead of needing an entire power plant to come out online, every single house becomes a small power plant that produces power 24/7, because it's not just producing power when the sun is out and charging the battery, but when the sun goes down and that house is no longer using power, that house can still continue to supply power to the grid if the grid needs that power, which actually would help alleviate a lot of things, because then that would make actual solutions a little bit more feasible. It seems a little bit odd, but it is a lot more feasible than just switching completely to whatever renewable source you want, because a lot of those renewable sources do not produce constant energy. Solar power only produces energy when the sun is out, which means 12 hours a day max. Wind power, well, it produces energy whenever the wind blows basically. So if the wind isn't blowing one day, you get no power. So if you implement changes where you're using wind power and you're using solar power on many different places, and then you have a place where collectively your entire grid is storing the power. It's not being stored in one place. You're storing the power across the entire power grid. You would effectively remove the need to have a large battery bank at a power station to store that power to make sure you have constant power. And you would also reduce the amount of power required to be generated at the main point of the generation. So your power plants, you could scale down your power plants, and instead of having a power plant that is massive and uses maybe 10 tons of gasoline per day, you can drop it down to 5 or even 1 in some cases if you have enough people doing solar on their houses, and if there's enough wind farms nearby. You can actually even completely eliminate that power plant over time as more people adopt in the batteries and have a power source in their own homes. You would actually need less and less reliance on the major power grid, because your home is supplying most of its power as needed. And so the power grid no longer becomes the main source of power. The power grid now becomes a backup source, just like as it is now that solar panels are basically a backup source of power. That would now be essentially what the power grid is, because everyone is generating power, everyone is storing power. Now you have the fact that all you need to do now is supplement that power, make sure the power doesn't completely get drained. So even in worst case scenarios where there's a storm and the power plant gets damaged and the power plant is producing maybe 50% of the power it normally does, the power plant, yes, it would suck, but all that would mean is people would have to use less power temporarily because the power plant is still pumping out enough power to send up to basically charge some of the batteries somewhat. And then the rest of the batteries can be charged by other things, solar power, wind power, and the rest of the grid from other states, because the grid across the United States is connected as one. Doing it this way, having the individual homes have the power source in them, would actually eliminate some of the power generation requirements that we have to push power between states. Because also you can string these batteries up along the state lines, you can string them up along interstates basically, even office buildings and things like that, they can have excess power sources, and you can have periodic power banks throughout the desert lands and wide open fields that would help keep power flowing throughout these places, and it would also help power the things around them so that you wouldn't need to generate a massive amount of power at one station to push that power 500 miles to another destination. You would actually just generate the power closer to that destination, but you would generate a lot less power at that destination because you would have ability to store the power where it's being used and where it needs to be, so you no longer need to have the generation capacity to push the power there. And that's just the basic gist of that. You would generate power at your home basically with the batteries, and your home would be the one that has your basic power plant at the backyard. And the other reason for the older style batteries, is not because they're not just easier to recycle and completely recyclable, but also these batteries stand up to weather a lot better, and they're less faulty than lithium-ion batteries. They're less prone to explosions and things like that, so they are quite a bit safer. They're not as efficient, but for what they're being used for, they would make a better fit than the newer lithium-ion batteries, because you would need to produce more, and this would be something that would have to be maintained. So it'd be easier and cheaper to maintain these batteries than if you were trying to maintain a lithium-ion battery or something else like that. But anyway, that's just my quick thought. I thought instead of just rambling about and complaining about these people and their nonsensical beliefs and how all this stuff works, I would just provide a solution, because they're not providing solutions, and I'd rather provide a solution than protest, because what's the point in protesting if you have nothing to gain, or if you're not finding a reason to make things better? You're just protesting for the sake of protesting, and you're benefiting no one. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you guys soon. I'm going on vacation though, so you're gonna see some older videos get posted probably over the next week or two.